Welcome to Film and Page. I'm Dominic, and in this video I'm going to be doing another audiobook review. So the book I'm going to be talking about in this video is If You Tell, the True Story of Murder, Family Secrets, and the Unbreakable Bond of Sisterhood by Gregg Olsen. So the last audiobook I reviewed was Who Stole Feminism by Christina Sommers. And I mentioned in that review that it was, a heavy topic, and it was kind of a little bit emotionally draining, a little bit depressing, because it was so political and stuff like that. But even though it was a really interesting book. So then the next book I decided to listen to was this one here. Now, why I decided on this book is it just popped up in the recommendations. It was on the #1 sellers list, and just something about the cover intrigued me, and the title caught my attention. And true crime is something that I'm not a huge fan of. True crime books. I'm kind of like, I guess, a casual fan. So every now and then I'll pick up a true crime book and read it, and just to get a break from like science fiction and fantasy and horror, all the other stuff that I mostly read. So this was a good break, but this was, I have to say, this was sent me down such a, I don't even know how to put it into words. It was a really interesting story. Don't get me wrong. It was like a page turner. I couldn't stop listening to this thing, but it was depressing, even way more depressing than the political book, way more darker, more just unbelievable. So there's that. Now, the one thing I want to talk about, I didn't discuss this in the previous video, but I want to talk about the person who reads the book. One thing I didn't mention in my review of Who Stole Feminism is the author of the book didn't read the book, and which I was kind of disappointed in, because I had watched some of Christina Sommers' videos on YouTube and heard some of her lectures and stuff like that, and listened to her on podcasts and all that. So I was disappointed that she didn't actually read the book, but the woman that did read the book actually did a fairly good job. And now, as for this book, I don't know what Gregg Olsen sounds like, so it doesn't really matter if you read it or not, in my opinion, from my perspective anyway. But they got a woman to read this one, and she did a really good job, and she did a little bit of voice acting. So there's, she kind of gives a different voice to each person in the book. So now there's going to be spoilers, so spoiler warning if you haven't read this book or listened to it. I'm going to be discussing the book pretty heavily. So now I'm going to kind of go through the people involved, because there's a lot of people that come and go in this story. So the book revolves mainly around, the book revolves around the Knotek family, and mainly Shelly Knotek. So people involved are Shelly Knotek and her husband Dave Knotek, and their 3 daughters, Nikki, Sammy, and Tori. And they have a cousin, Shane Watson, and also another key person in this is their best friend, Kathy Loreno, and then Ronald Woodworth, and then there's an elderly man that Shelley looked after, James McClintock. And so then I'll kind of give the summary of events without any spoilers at this point in the video. So the whole story revolves around the Knotek family, and mainly Shelly Knotek, and about how she had this really bad upbringing, and she was a very extremely troubled child, and in no uncertain terms, she was a complete psychopath. And the whole story is about how her and her husband made their 3 daughters' lives a living hell, and subjected to their 3 daughters to very extreme forms of abuse. And not only them, but other people in their lives, mainly Kathy Loreno, their best friend, and also another one of their friends, Ronald Woodworth, and also James McClintock. And it's a very dark story and goes down a really dark road. So the story is all about how these 3 sisters escaped their psychopathic mom, and how eventually Shelly Knotek was brought to justice along with her husband. And it's got a lot of twists and turns and stuff like that in the book. It's really, even though it's disturbing, it's very engrossing. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the whole thing that this book revolves around is Shelly Knotek, or Michelle Knotek. So her background was Michelle Knotek was actually born Michelle Watson in Raymond, Washington in 1954. And her mother was really troubled, had a lot of drug and alcohol problems and things like that. And she just decided one day she didn't want her kids, so she phoned up her ex-boyfriend or ex-husband and said, well, now you said you were going to take these kids, now you have to take them. And she basically dumped them all off in his lap and disappeared. And so her father would always, one of the things I noticed when they were describing her childhood is her father, when he got her in his custody, would just cave into her every whim, and she could do no wrong, and she was basically his princess and all like that. So just basically further fostered her narcissism and her being a psychopath. And just to give a few quick examples of the stuff that she would do as a child, she would take broken glass and put it in people's shoes, so they would cut their feet up when they put their shoes on. And the other thing she would do, or one thing that really stood out that she did, she actually had a magazine with a rape story in it. And so she read the magazine, and then she went to school the next day and repeated the story to the people at her class and her teachers and stuff, but she said her father had done that to her. And now her father was like a city councilman or in some like political job, so he had a lot to lose because of this. So he actually got involved. The cops got involved, and they questioned him, brought him in, and all that. How they got out of it was the stepmom actually found the magazine in her bedroom and found the story, and then that's how they got clear of that one. So really crazy stuff like that she would do when she was growing up. That's when she was a child and a teenager. And then so her father, Raymond, or her father, married a woman named Diana Watson. So I feel really bad for this woman. I read this book. So this woman got involved with Shelly's dad, and Shelly's dad kind of was like a egotistical liar himself. That's what I got from reading the book. So he basically told her he was 4 years older than her. He was actually 10, and never revealed that he had children. And so she married him, and at a very young age. And once they were married, then he told her, oh yeah, by the way, I've got 3 children. Shelly, Chuck, and Paul. That was the 3 children. And so then she had to raise these children that were just basically dropped on her lap, and they were all very troubled children, especially with Shelly. Shelly was like basically like an evil child, like a demon spawn that was dropped into their lap. And the other thing that was highlighted is the grandmother was really crazy as well. She was, from the sounds of it, the grandmother was Shelly's grandmother, the dad's mother. She was like very psycho too. She would do a lot of weird stuff and probably had a history of abuse, but they don't go into a whole lot of detail there. So there's a lot of dysfunctionality going on in the family on the father's side of this story. So I'm going to go into deeper detail in the story. So Shelly Knotek was married twice before. So her first husband left her because she was too crazy, and that's who the father of the first girl, Nikki, was. And what she would do is she kind of had this feud going on with her family at the time, and even with the ex-husband. So the family and stuff from her ex-husband's side would send Christmas presents to her, and she would then take the presents, hide them away, and then take the name tags off them, and then put her own tags on them and say that she had bought them and give them to her daughter. And then she would tell her that, you know, your father doesn't care about you and his side of the family hates you guts. And it's just me and you. And really bizarre, just horrible stuff she would do. And the other thing that she would do to her daughters when they were small babies is she would actually, and in toddlers and stuff, she had this thing where she would hold a pillow over their face while they were sleeping until they would wake up gasping for air, and then take the pillow off and then pretend to coddle them and say, oh, what's wrong? You're having a bad dream. Oh, don't worry, mom's here to save you, and stuff like that. Really bizarre stuff. So then she gets married again for a second time with another guy, and that doesn't last very long. And then she has the second daughter, Sammy. And then finally, her final husband that she gets married to is Dave Knotek, and that's the father of Tori. And so now this is where the story really picks up, where all three, the 3 daughters are living there with Dave Knotek and Shelly Knotek in like a farm, on a farm area with a lot of land around it. So they could do a lot of weird stuff and get away with it because there's not really anyone watching around. They're kind of like insulated. So the story goes into how she would abuse these three daughters, and how it would work is the oldest daughter would get the worst. So the younger ones were a little bit shielded, but the oldest one, Nikki, really got it bad. So she would do things like beat them with extension cords and belts, and then wash them down with bleach when they were wounded and stuff like that. And another thing they would do that was really disturbing is they would make them. She would make them wallow, what she called wallowing. So she would make her daughters strip off naked, go outside, and didn't matter how. Like one scene in the book I thought was really disturbing. She made her oldest daughter, Nikki, who was, I think, at 16 years old, go outside, strip her clothes off in the wintertime, while her husband, Dave, was hosing her down with a hose, and would make her squat on the ground while she hosed her down and make her wallow. And she would say, wallow, and tell me what a horrible person you are and stuff like that. And her mom would like mentally or verbally berate her while they hosed her down, telling her to wallow and tell her how disgusting she was. And she did it so long that icicles actually formed on the girl's feet from the running water had gotten so cold. So then what they did after that is her mom actually filled up the tub with scalding hot water and threw her daughter in it after her daughter was out in freezing temperatures. So really terrible stuff like that. And this went on for like a long time. And she would do the other things with the other daughters. The only one that was kind of spared was the youngest daughter, Tori. So now, as the story goes on, they get another person to come live at their house, their cousin Shane, who was around the same age as Nikki. And things were kind of good for him for a while, but after a while, Shelly Knotek also started to really abuse him very badly too. And she had this weird thing where she would she had this thing about nudity. And it wasn't like a sexual thing they were describing in the book, but it was like a power tripping thing. So what she would do is she made Nikki and Shane strip off naked and slow dance together in the middle of the living room while she watched, and made her husband watch, and made the other two sisters watch. And then she would berate them and call them names and all this kind of stuff. So it was really, really terrible things she would do to her children. And now where things really get disgusting in the book is when it's already gotten really bad. But where things really get dark in this book is when the best friend, Kathy Loreno, comes to live with the family. So Shelly Knotek was like a wicked liar and super manipulative. And she had a knack for picking out people who were very vulnerable. Because when I was listening to this book, I was like, what are these people, crazy? Why can't they just, like, I could understand the children because they don't know any different. But like the woman, I couldn't really wrap my brain around it. Until they kind of explained that this woman was very vulnerable. So Kathy Loreno was a hairdresser, and she was, had a lot of financial problems, and she was estranged from her family. She was had this weird feud with her family, and her family was, they weren't on speaking terms. And she was kind of like in a desperate spot. And so Shelly Knotek became friends with her through the salon and offered, hey, we can help you out. You can come live with me. And so she did. She came to live with them, and everything was good for the first while. And then eventually, and how the abuse would work, especially with the adults, is Shelly Knotek would slowly dial up the abuse. So she wouldn't go from like 0 to 60 right away with the abuse. She would start off doing small things like name calling here and like some mild abuse there. And then the other thing she did, where this Kathy Loreno was already in a desperate situation to make the abuse worse, is to kind of, I guess, to break down any mental barriers, is she started feeding her really powerful psychiatric drugs. And one of them was Prozac. But there are other ones, so mentally she would be in a fog. So the woman would be almost like drugged up all the time and not really have a good grasp of reality. And she was like extremely controlling, and she was like that with the whole family. And so she did this with Kathy Loreno all the time. And then she started doing this thing with Kathy Loreno, where she would make her do all the housework. And on top of that, she would make her do all the housework naked. That was like a punishment thing. She had this weird thing about nudity. And it didn't matter who was there, even if her kids were there. Like, even the daughter said they just got used to it. They would just be watching cartoons, and this Kathy woman would be going around doing all this housework with not a stitch of clothes on. Really bizarre stuff. And then the other thing she started doing was she actually removed Kathy from the guest bedroom and made her sleep in the basement. And it was an unfinished basement. First, she gave her a mattress, then she took that away from her. So then she was making her sleep on like the concrete floor. And then on top of that, not really feeding her. And this cycle went on. And then eventually they moved to another property that had more land around it and had what they called a pump house. And then she eventually made Kathy Loreno stay inside this pump house, which wasn't really insulated or anything. And like the stuff she did was just horrible. Like, and she would also do the hose wallowing thing with this Kathy woman. Her husband Dave would kick her around, kick her in the head. They waterboarded her. They never let her wear clothes half the time. And so this went on for 5 full years. This abuse went on mentally. And it got to the point where Kathy Loreno had absolutely deteriorated mentally and physically, to the point where her hair and teeth were falling out, and she had lost all weight, and her skin was almost like, the way they described it in the book, her skin was like sagging off her body, and she was all full of sores, and it was just really, really terrible. And the other thing is, in the last few years, the abuse got so bad to the point where she kept her out in this pump house all the time and would regularly go out there and beat her. And what she would feed her was like, she would take like moldy, rotted meat and mix it in with like, other stuff and make like these really disgusting shakes and go out there and force Kathy to drink it. And it was horrible stuff. And then the kids even got a chance to help Kathy escape, but by that point it was too far gone. Like, Kathy Loreno's mental faculties were too far gone. Physically, she was too far gone. She couldn't do it. She had basically given up and resigned herself to death. So now the hardest chapter in this book for me, listening to it, was the actual death of Kathy Loreno. This was the hardest thing to listen to. It would just put like horrid mental images in my mind. So Kathy Loreno had been stuck out in this pump house for weeks and weeks and weeks, and getting fed like just rotted meat blended up in a blender, and for God knows how long. And then they had waterboarded her. Dave had beaten her husband Dave, kicked her in the head with his steel-toed boots and stuff like that. Until finally they realized that something was really wrong with her. Like, she wasn't functioning mentally. Like, and it's kind of, I think it kind of gave Shelly Knotek a bit of a scare, that realized like this may have gone too far. This not out of any form of sympathy, obviously, but she could actually start it the way that she could actually get in trouble for this. And so what they did is they brought her in the house, and the kids even noticed that she wasn't acting normally. She wasn't acting herself, and they tried to clean her up. But she fell down and actually fell through like the shower glass and got all cut up and stuff. They tried to bandage her up, but she was like almost like she couldn't talk. She was almost like a child. They could tell she had like severe brain damage, and she just wasn't with it anymore. And so they put her on a mattress in the back. I think it was the laundry room, let her stay there. And then Shelly Knotek left the house with the girls. They went out, and while they were there, Dave Knotek was looking after Kathy, and Shane was there, and Kathy's eyes weren't tracking any movements anymore. She couldn't speak anymore. And then she started to throw up, and then she ended up choking on her own vomit, and then she passed away and died. And so then Shelly Knotek came home, and they found the dead body. So then they somehow convinced themselves, well, this was just an accident. We didn't actually kill her, and things like that. And so what they ended up doing was Dave Knotek basically built a huge bonfire in the backyard and cremated Kathy Loreno in the back, and cleaned up all of her ashes, had them all ground up, and took them off to some coast somewhere and threw them off of a cliff into the ocean, scattered her ashes. And to cover up the crime, where she was already like separated from her family, how they kind of kept the family off any suspicious trails is Dave would actually, or Shelly would actually forge letters in some strange handwriting and say it was or forge Kathy's handwriting, send it to her family. And actually how they would do it was they would actually have Dave drive to another state in another city and then mail the letters from there to her family with this concocted story that she had gotten a new boyfriend who was a trucker and they were on the road all the time. So the family just thought she was alive and didn't have anything to do with him for the longest time before they got any suspicions that she had actually passed away. So now that was the first victim. Now the second victim actually is Shane Watson, because he knew how messed up this was and he said that, this is really messed up, we have to tell someone. And Shelly actually threatened him, like, you can't tell anyone, or something really bad's going to happen to you. And so then he was actually killed by Dave Knotek, shot him in the back of the head with a rifle, then did the same thing to him, cremated his body and got rid of the ashes. So that was the second victim. So now at this point, later on, Nikki had gotten old enough and she started going to school and college and actually escaped, went to live with her grandmother and got away from her mother. And then the next person behind her to escape the house was Sammy. Now after Nikki left, it was Sammy got the brunt of the abuse after that, because it would move down the line. So now she got the full brunt of the abuse. So then she got away from the home, went to live with her older sister. All that was left behind was Tori. So now the two sisters had to find a way to get her out of the house because they knew now all the abuse would be put down on her. So now the next victim of this crazy woman is Ron. So same thing. Ron was an openly gay guy and who was also on the outs with his family, and who had recently broken up with his partner and had nothing left and was completely broke and was living in a trailer, and got to know Shelly Knotek. And same thing, he was in a vulnerable spot and she got him to live with her and did the exact same thing to him that she did to Kathy Loreno. Gave him all kinds of drugs, slowly dialed up the abuse, verbally abused him, mentally abused him, emotionally abused him, and would make him work around this farm, doing all kinds of nonsense chores. And then the thing she would do with him, her and Dave, is she would make him stand on top of the roof and then jump off and stuff like that in his bare feet till he split his feet all open and stuff like that. And just basically abused him the exact same way until he died. And then Dave Knotek did the same thing to him, got rid of the body again. So it was really, really crazy. So finally, the sisters go to the cops. The oldest sister go to the cops, but the younger sister, Sammy, at first doesn't want anything to do with it, so they couldn't get any charges to stick. And then finally they do, and the cops investigate them, round them up, and finally it was the husband, Dave Knotek, that cracked and spilt the beans, and they got sent away jail for life sentences. And so I think Shelly Knotek is actually up for parole next year, 2022, and Dave has already been released and is out. So just it was a really dark, disturbing story, and it was. Now the one thing I got to talk about is Shelly Knotek is beyond evil. I can't think of anyone so evil like that. What just lives for absolute, just gets absolute pleasure from the absolute misery and torture of other human beings. It's actually really disturbing to think that people are actually like this and they're out there living. It's just insane. But I have to talk about her husband, Dave Knotek. So it seems to me the book kind of goes a little bit soft on him because he works wicked hours. He's a construction guy. He's always working out of town doing 16-hour days. And Shelly, on top of being a psychopath, she was extremely lazy and refused to work, and just spent her husband's money faster than he could make it. So his excuse was for all this abuse, I just figured this was regular disciplining of children, and I just figured kids need a firm hand, and he was the ultimate cuck, the ultimate simp. You couldn't get more of a simp than this dude. he did everything this woman said. And this woman like blew his money on him, you know, got him to murder people for her. On top of that, she cheated on him. That was in the book. And she like verbally abused him as well. And it was just, he was just like I can't see anyone having any respect for this guy. Apparently, the two sisters don't talk to him, but the youngest one, Tori, still does. Still has some kind of a relationship with Dave Knotek. And what's really interesting is at the end of the book, there's this thing that I didn't know about, but it was called the Scale of Evil. It's called, and it was developed by Michael Stone of Columbia University, and it's a 22 level scale. And so just to give you, like 22 being the most extreme and from 1 to 22. So just to give you an example of the two extremes. So level 1 on this scale is those who have killed in self-defense and who do not show traces of being a psychopath. Then you got the highest level, level 22, and this fits Shelly Knotek to a T. Psychopathic torture murderers, where torture is the primary motive. So it's not necessarily murder that they want. It's they want to torture the person. In most cases, the crime has a sexual motivating factor. I don't think this was the case with Shelly Knotek, but it seemed like she didn't really want to kill Kathy. She wanted to keep Kathy alive forever so she could just keep torturing her more and more and more and more. And same thing with Ron. But eventually, the person could only take so much and they died. So I know this is a long-winded video and I don't think it's going to get a lot of views, but this is a super disturbing book. I have to admit, it's one of the most disturbing true crime books I've ever read, or I guess listened to. But it was extremely disturbing. Now, the next one I'm going to review after this is, I switched gears completely. It's not political. It's not true crime. It's actually a pretty good, uplifting story. And that'll be the next one I'm going to talk about. So that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one. I'd like to say thank you to all of my subscribers. I appreciate you all in helping this channel grow. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when new videos are uploaded.